So you want to learn about cocktails and how to make them? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover every single thing that you need to know to become an expert cocktail maker. We're going to cover what each of the essential tools are and how to use them, when to shake versus stirring a cocktail, how to properly balance a cocktail, what bitters are and how to use them, the importance of sugar and fresh juice in a cocktail, and so much more. I've been a bartender now for almost 10 years and I currently own and operate my own bar and restaurant. This guide has been developed and honed over the last decade of my career, and it's actually the exact training program that my bartenders go through when I hire them. So whether you're an at-home bartender or you just want to up your skills professionally, this guide has got you covered. So sit back, grab yourself a cocktail, and enjoy. So I plan on answering 3 key questions. The first being, what is a cocktail? The second being, where do they come from and what a little bit about their history? And lastly, why do they matter? So what exactly is a cocktail? As defined by the Oxford Dictionary, a cocktail is an alcoholic drink made up of a spirit or spirits and other ingredients such as fruit juices or cream. And while I think that is generally true, I don't think that definition really helps you on your path to making cocktails, because you can kind of just throw things together in any single which way, and sure, they might kind of taste okay, but that's not really the point. There is a method to all of the madness, and I promise we're gonna get to that. But before we get into cocktail theory and recipes, I think it's important that we first go back to where cocktails came from. So to understand cocktails, it's really important to understand that they've been around for hundreds of years, and it's also important to know that the earliest spirits weren't really as refined as they are today. So the rum probably wasn't as good as what you're gonna find at the grocery store today, and the cachaça, which is another ancient spirit, probably is much better today than it ever was back in 1500 when it was invented. And so when you really only had a couple of options to get drunk, whether it was beer or wine or these kind of rudimentary, almost raw spirits, someone needed to get kind of creative to make things palatable, make it drinkable. A lot of people say that like the urban legend around why cocktails came about is that you really just needed a way to drink this stuff because it was too harsh on your palate. What most people consider to be the original cocktail is punch. The name punch actually comes from the Hindi word for 5, and the reason for that is that there were 5 ingredients in the original punch. And those 5 ingredients were spirit, sweetener, citrus, spice, and a lengthener. And by lengthener, it usually was something along the lines of water or tea, whatever kind of drink that was kind of basic that you could add to it to kind of lengthen out the cocktail, to dilute it a little bit more, to really balance the whole cocktail together. And so with those 5 basic ingredients, you kind of have a template for what a cocktail really is. Of course, over the years, there have been other templates of cocktails that have kind of spun off of the original punch cocktail formula or format, if you will. But this is kind of the most basic and easy to understand basic cocktail. And there is a theory that some bartenders prescribe to and really does help to explain a lot of this, and it's actually featured in the Cocktail Codex, which is a book that we will get to later on in this series. But the idea is that there's basically only a small number of root cocktails, and everything else is kind of spun off of those cocktails. I do find that a little restricting because I think that you do need to have a little bit of freedom, but you do need to understand the rules first. People say you can break the rules once you understand them, and so I think it's very important to grasp these key concepts before you start experimenting a little bit too wildly. And the reason is it really teaches you the mechanics behind different spirits. It teaches you what goes well with what. It allows you to really learn how to blend and combine different flavors and tastes through these classic and historic root cocktails. But we'll get to that in another video, I promise. So we've covered what a cocktail is. We've covered a little bit of the roots of where cocktails came from. And really the last question I really want to answer is, why do cocktails matter? Well, for me, it's really kind of the same reason why homemade cookies matter. It's essentially comparing, a fresh batch of fantastically homemade cookies that your grandma would make and like Chips Ahoy from the grocery store. Yes, Chips Ahoy, they do, satisfy that craving if all you want is, kind of stale chocolate chip tasting kind of things, but there's no substitute for that fresh baked, fantastic, fresh chocolate chip cookie that your grandma would make. And that to me is very similar to cocktails. Yes, you can have a crappily made margarita, but the day that you have one made with fresh lime juice, fantastic tequila, and you really taste the difference. And that to me right there is really the explanation of why cocktails matter. On top of that, everything that goes on in the cocktail and bartending world has so much heritage and history to it. These spirits have been being made for some of them for 500 years. Some of them date back hundreds of years, and there's so much history behind it that I personally love that aspect to it, because it's about cultural heritage. It's about what our ancestors were doing to get drunk. And I think it's a really cool way to kind of connect with people from the past by getting to experience things that are very similar to what they did. So it's like, to me, it's like an ongoing conversation with our past self. Wow, I'm really sorry that I got this deep about getting drunk. At the core of this, we drink because we enjoy being tipsy and having a good time. But for me, it's like, if we are gonna get tipsy, if we are gonna have a good time, why not do it in the best tasting way possible? We've all had shots. We all know how much they suck. We all know how much the hangover sucks. But if you have a couple of old fashions or a couple of daiquiris, you're gonna be feeling excellent and you're gonna have a great night. And that to me is worth so much more than taking a couple of nips of Fireball before going out. And don't get me wrong, shots, there's definitely places for them, but I just wanna explain that cocktails really should have at least a spot within your selection of drinks. So you wanna learn how to make cocktails and use all these funky tools? Well, I got you. I'm gonna show you just that. Making cocktails can sometimes feel a little intimidating because it seems like you have so many different crazy tools that you need to effectively be able to create a fantastic cocktail. Well, today I'm gonna kind of go through each and every one of the tools and show you how to use them and talk about which ones I think are super essential and the ones that you may not need in your home bar. But I'll go through all the ones that I use at my bar and restaurant. That way you can kind of at least get an idea for that. But the first one that we're gonna go over is your shaking tin. So this is your shaking tin. They are two pieces of metal that attach to one another to form a seal for you to shake a cocktail. In the future video, I will get into the difference between shaking and stirring a cocktail, but just for this video, just understand that you shake some cocktails and you stir some cocktails, and we'll get into that in the future. So you got two different pieces of metal that attach. Some people like to use a pint glass as in place of the small shaker. I get a little scared because glass, it freaks me out a little bit, especially when you're, smashing it to form a seal. I have seen people break pint glasses with their hands. It is not fun. Bartender I used to work with, she had to go to the ER because she had to get stitches on her hand from breaking a pint glass in her shaker. So I do not recommend using glass. I mean, if you're at home, do whatever you want. But I do recommend just getting two equally weighted cocktail tins that do attach. By far the most important thing that you can buy to make yourself make better cocktails is a jigger. This is our measuring tool. This is like the measuring spoons or cups in baking. This is more than essential. If you do not have one, I do not believe you can make effective, fantastic cocktails, because cocktail making is more a science and less an art. More measurement, more theory than a lot of people kind of give it credit for. The beautiful thing about what I have here, which is, we call it a Japanese jigger, here you usually have two sides, and usually the bottom side is about half the measurement of the top side. So in this here, I have a 2/1. So 2 ounces in the big one, 1 ounce in the small one. They have markings on the inside. So you not only have two measurements in one little piece of equipment here, you have about 5 measurements. So on the tall one, you have 2 ounces up to the top, but on the inside, you have a 1.5 ounce marking. On the bottom one, you have 1 ounce at the top, but then on the inside, you also have 3/4 of an ounce and 1/2 ounce. For most recipes, this should get you through. I do recommend getting a smaller one with 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce measurements. It's one that I happen to have missing, which I can't find mine, but that one is another interesting one as well. Now, I would say that those two pieces of equipment that I just showed you really knock out a majority of the things that you need to make effective cocktails. As long as you have the ingredients available to you, measuring, shaking with a little bit of ice usually gets the job done, but we're gonna keep going. The next thing I wanna show you guys are bar spoons and a stirring glass, a mixing glass. I have this one from Campari. I got it for free. I got this one right here. It's nice. It's used for stirring cocktails. And then you have bar spoons. As you can see, I have two different ones here. I put both of these up for a very specific purpose. You're gonna want a weighted cocktail spoon. It actually makes stirring much easier because it acts as a counterweight, which makes it much easier to stir. This one that has a fancy little logo on the top, while it gets the job done, it does make it a little bit harder because this has no weight at all. So when you're stirring it, it requires a little bit more work from you. So get a weighted bar spoon. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is a muddler. This is used to muddle fruit, to express oils, to really mix in some of those fresh fruit ingredients into a cocktail. Muddler, super important. This right here is a citrus juicer. For most of you home bartenders, this will be absolutely essential. I don't use it in my day-to-day because I have a large juicing machine that makes a ton of fresh juice for the bar, but this right here is indispensable. If I'm making just a quick cocktail and I don't want to juice a whole bunch, cut a lime in half or a lemon in half, squeeze, boom, you're done. Indispensable bar tool. And next we're gonna go on to our strainers. So you have about 3 different strainers that I would say are essential. So the first one is a Hawthorne strainer. This one goes into your tins and it helps keep the stuff that's in here from inside the glass. So put stuff in there, you put your Hawthorne strainer, it actually gives you the ability to throttle to control how much comes in and out of this as you're pouring. You usually use it in conjunction with a fine mesh strainer or a tea strainer because a lot of times, while this does keep big chunks out, it does not keep small pieces out, like small pieces of mint, small pieces of ice that you don't want to over dilute your drink. So you use it in conjunction with a fine mesh strainer. You get everything out of it and only the good things in the glass. Lastly, you have what we call a julep strainer. This one actually goes into your mixing glasses to keep the ice in there for when you're making cocktails. It's great because it actually really lends itself to a nice little, you can hold it pretty easily. Next, you have a very basic Y peeler. It's called a Y peeler because of the shape of a Y. And this is essential for making garnishes and peels. You can get these pretty cheap. You might even have them, you might even be able to use just a vegetable peeler from your kitchen, but very, very important. I would also recommend a cutting board and a knife. I mean, you don't have to get fancy like I do, but that's because I like to be bougie sometimes. So I have a nice little bartending knife and a cool little wooden paddle. You can just use a regular cutting board and knife from your home. I like to be extra. And then lastly, one that is a little interesting as well is a funnel. Great for when you make syrups, you can put it in a bottle or transferring stuff from one bottle to another. Essential as well. And last but not least, 2 that are good to have, but I wouldn't say they're necessary if you're just a home bartender. Just a nice, easy bottle opener. I have this nice one that my sister made with the logo of the restaurant, just to pop open good bottles. We have soda water and different beer that we have. It's a bottle cap, so this is great to easily open up those real quick so you don't have to worry and chase around. Or you also have a wine key, which has and does all the same features. If you're a server or if you worked in restaurants, you should have one of these. It's double hinge for you to be able to open wine bottles. It has a foil knife and a bottle opener at the end. Maybe not essential for cocktail making, but a great to have nonetheless if you work behind a bar. And now for some of the stuff that I use that might not be super essential, but could help you depending on the cocktail. Most of you already have something like this in your home, but I have a little blender. We use it to make blended cocktails at the restaurant, but if you have a blender at home, great, excellent. Frozen cocktails, if made well, can be fantastic. And I also have a butane torch. And I have a little butane torch. This is nice to play around, make little fire effects, express oils onto. It's really fun. If you have matches at home or a lighter, you're good. But there you have it, guys. Here are the tools that you need to be an effective bartender or to make drinks at home. So before we get into shaking versus stirring, the first thing that we need to talk about is why you use either technique really. If you've watched the first video in this series on the introduction to cocktails, you'll remember that a cocktail is an alcoholic drink consisting of a spirit or spirits mixed with other ingredients. So when you mix ingredients, you gotta find a way to actually mix them and put them together and infuse the different flavors together. And so that is actually the first basic reason why you even stir or shake a cocktail. These are just 2 of the most common methods to making cocktails because they give you the most control. But outside of just mixing the ingredients together, it's also important to know that dilution in water is probably one of the most overlooked and underappreciated ingredients to every single cocktail. Too little water and the cocktail comes out too hot in terms of alcoholic flavor, and too much water and you get an over diluted cocktail. Shaking and stirring also plays a huge role into introducing water into each and every cocktail. And these 2 methods give you kind of the most control into how to do that. All right, I get it. I know what you must be thinking. Great, Louis, thank you so much. You're just explaining that you need to mix cocktails. Woohoo. Seems like common sense, right? Like that was pretty self-explanatory, dude. But hold your horses, I'm getting to the interesting part. So why do you use one technique versus the other? Well, the most basic way to explain that is it really depends on the ingredients that you are mixing. So probably the best way to start to describe to you why you would shake a cocktail versus why you would stir a cocktail is to understand what happens when you do each of those. When you shake a cocktail, you are not only combining all of the ingredients and chilling down the drink and diluting it, you are also adding and introducing air into the cocktail. So when you have some heavier elements and you're shaking it, it kind of helps bring it all together and brighten it up and give it a nice, almost fluffier kind of feel. Whereas when you are stirring a cocktail, you are looking to just smoothen it out, introduce a good amount of water and chill it down, but doing so in a very, very smooth and non-agitating way. So I like to say that if there's anything that is almost like a cloudy ingredient or something that has a little bit more viscosity or a little bit more of a fat to it, something that isn't easily introduced, it needs to be shaken. Things like lime juice, lemon juice, coconut milk, anything that has some sort of fat or a thicker kind of element, it really needs to be not only shaken to be aerated and mixed in. When you shake, you are aerating and adding air to the cocktail, which helps bring those flavors together and actually gives you a cohesive cocktail. Stirring those kinds of ingredients doesn't always lend itself to a cocktail that's well balanced. It won't actually feel like it's one thing. It'll feel like separate different ingredients in the same glass. So if you have anything like fruit juice, some sort of milk or cream or anything like that, it really needs to be shaken. So for example, if you were trying to make a classic daiquiri, which is rum, lime juice, and sugar, those are ingredients that definitely need to be shaken. You need to get that rum to mix really well with that lime juice and the sugar, and you really need to aerate it to kind of really bring it up and have it all be mixed into the cocktail. Whereas if you were making a Manhattan or an old fashioned, you really, really need to stir it because at the end of the day, you really want a smooth, almost delicate cocktail that really doesn't need to be agitated. You just want to mix those flavors without agitating the liquid too much. Okay, so now that we've gone over the differences between each technique, why they're important and why you would use each one, I guess the next question becomes is, how do you know you've done it correctly? When it comes to a shaken cocktail, you'll end up having a good frost on the outside of your tin, as well as when you pour out the cocktail, you'll have a nice foamy layer at the top when you have those ingredients. And that's how you know you've properly diluted and aerated that cocktail. So let's make a quick daiquiri just so I can show you guys. And so we built the cocktail in our smaller shaker tin. We're gonna grab our larger shaker tin, make a nice flat side with it, and really lock that in there so that when we are shaking, there's no chance that this is gonna come apart, and I'm gonna drench myself in daiquiri. And then the other thing that you wanna keep in mind is that these are usually stainless steel. You wanna make sure that you're not transferring excessive heat from your palms into the drink, which is actually gonna kind of mess up your dilution. So you really don't want to have a lot of contact with your palms on the cocktail while shaking. So I'm gonna grab them at the two ends and try not to transfer too much heat. And as for shaking technique, it varies wildly from bartender to bartender. It's really what feels comfortable to you. I used to shake in a specific way and it was actually giving me elbow pain. And so I then just changed up my mechanics until something felt a little bit more right. And so it really depends on you. Find what feels right to you. But the idea is to basically throw the ice back and forth to really mix it in there, break some of that up, dilute it, and aerate the cocktail. You really do gotta introduce air, and for that, you gotta hit it back and forth. You have to shake it back and forth really, really hard. And so you got that nice frosty little tin there. You can see some of the, it's really frosted on the outside. And we're gonna pop that open. The way you wanna do it is you wanna find really close to where the two tins connect. You wanna find that little space and bang it on the side of your palm here, that'll release the tin. And then we're gonna grab our Hawthorne strainer, our tea strainer, and we are gonna pour that out. As you can see, maybe you can't, there's quite a bit of bubbles in here, and it ends up all settling at the top where you can see a good amount of air bubbles have formed. That's usually a good indication that you've aerated it quite well. And you can see that the entire drink is one consistent color and it's very mixed in. It's very chilled down. It is a perfectly diluted cocktail. You can almost see a lighter ring at the top of this cocktail. And so now let's make a stirred cocktail. I'm gonna make a Negroni. These are 3 ingredients. They're all alcohol based. There's no citrus and there's nothing that has anything a little bit thicker or viscosity. So really we're just trying to combine the flavors, chill this down and properly dilute it. So we've got all of our ingredients in here. We are going to fill up our mixing glass with ice almost all the way to the top. We want as much ice making as much contact with this drink, with this cocktail as possible to be able to dilute it. So now that we did that, we are gonna add our weighted bar spoon into the side here, and we are going to stir until this reaches the proper temperature and proper dilution. This should take quite a bit. You shouldn't, like I wouldn't be done right here. You should stir for quite a little while. I would say anywhere between probably 15, 20, 30 seconds. And that again, is not a hard rule because it really depends on the cocktail. Some cocktails require more dilution, some require less. But the best way to do it is tasting it and evaluating it. And that way you have to learn the proper dilution yourself, unfortunately. It's one of those trial and error things. But hey, the good news is that means you get to drink some more. And so if you can tell here, I'm holding this mixing glass at the very bottom because I do not want to transfer any excess heat from my hand into this cocktail. So all I'm doing is making sure that this mixing glass isn't going anywhere by holding the very bottom of it. I would say that's probably about good, but I am gonna test it out. I'm gonna grab a straw and we're gonna give this a little taste. All right, let's see if we've properly diluted this Negroni. Oh yeah, that right there is perfectly diluted. It's got that silky texture on the tongue, it's ice cold, and it is a perfectly well-balanced Negroni. Let's pour this out before it continues to dilute in our mixing glass. And we will keep it chilled over this large cube. These little details that seem kind of minute when it comes to, or unimportant when it comes to making cocktails, this really is what makes the difference between a really well-crafted cocktail and just something that someone threw together. These things matter. So I hope that but that's enough from me. I've got 2 delicious cocktails I have to get back to drinking, and we'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. Really liked using that Argentinian gin in this Negroni. It's really good. Fresh fruit juice is a key component to any fantastic cocktail, and today I'm gonna show you why. If you watched my video on the introduction to cocktails, you'll remember that fruit juice is a key component to cocktails. And if you haven't checked that out, I'm gonna link it up right here. This video is the 4th or 3rd in a series on the basics of cocktails and cocktail making. So after you're done with this one, make sure you loop back around and watch all the other videos so that you don't miss out on any of the key information. And this really shouldn't come as much of a surprise to you because juice really is what gives a lot of cocktails a lot of their flavor, or a lot of the key parts of their flavor. Think of a margarita or a daiquiri. That limey sharpness that you get from those cocktails comes from the fresh fruit juice. But before I get too far ahead of myself, my name is Louis, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. On this channel, I talk about cocktail recipes, my favorite spirits, what it's like to own my own restaurant and bar, most importantly, bartending tips and tricks. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, come on over here, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon to never miss out on any of the videos that I post. Right, enough of my rambling, let's get back to why fruit juice is so important. There are 2 ways that you can instantly upgrade the quality of the cocktails that you are making for your friends and family, and one of them is to have better quality spirits, and the second way is to use fresh fruit juice, either freshly squeezed or freshly pressed. When I tell you that that will up your cocktail game by 20 times, I'm not exaggerating. And to even expand upon that a little bit, what I should say is using the freshest ingredients possible, especially when it comes to if you're gonna be using any herbs or anything like that, try to always use the freshest possible. And it really shouldn't come as a surprise, really. No one wants to drink old or fake juice. If you've had a margarita or a daiquiri made with sour mix, you know that really isn't, like, that's not juice. Like, that's just garbage. And so, no, if you're thinking, well, but I can just buy lime juice or I can just buy orange juice. Like, you could, but I really don't recommend it. It's so easy to have fresh juice that it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. Juice your limes fresh, juice your lemons fresh, and juice your fruits fresh, please, for the love of God. And the reason is, if any of you have ever juiced lime juice or any fruit juice, you know that it tends to go bad pretty quickly. And so a lot of these store-bought brands, if they're even labeled as juice, they have some sort of additive to preserve it. And that just doesn't taste right. It's just not worth it. Lime juice pretty much starts going bad the moment that you cut the lime open. And so you only really have like a 12-hour window to use it. Lemon juice tends to last a little bit longer, but not that much. And if any of you have ever juiced a grapefruit, you know that by the next day you can barely, by the next day, it's pretty much gone already. At La Barretas, we juice every single day before the opening of our shift. We don't take chances. All of the juice is always freshly squeezed. That's the only way that I can guarantee that all of our cocktails will be consistent through the whole night. And it really is easy for you at home to have fresh, high quality juice. This is all you need right here to have fresh, high quality juice at home. It's perfect. You can cut open a lime, place that bad boy right in there, and voila, you have yourself fresh juice. Takes you 2 seconds. Just keep some fresh fruit on hand. It lasts longer if you don't cut it open, and you're always gonna have the ability to make fresh juice. Super versatile tool. You don't need anything crazy, but now I'm gonna show you what I've used because it is a little bit crazier, but this really is all you need at home. Most of you probably even have one and you don't even know it. If you do, go to your kitchen, check out to see if you have one. It's probably there somewhere. It is very, very useful. Because I'm juicing on a much larger scale to provide service of cocktails for so many people, this just isn't gonna cut it. For the longest time, I actually used this $20 Cuisinart citrus juicer. It's tiny, I got it from Amazon, but this thing is a workhorse. For $20, I got a juicer that provided me with a small size juicer that provided all the juice for like almost the first year of us being open here at La Barretas. We didn't have a big bar, so I didn't have too much of a need for fresh juice, so this was perfect. I highly recommend this if you enjoy hosting cocktail parties or like making fresh cocktails for your friends and family at holidays. Really easy to juice. You can juice up at the top, it comes out here. You can already put a strainer right below it to strain it. That way you already have your freshly strained juice, and then put it in bottles the way we do. But I found out that my orange juicer can actually be used to juice lemons and limes, and I spent a year using this little thing. Today, I'm no longer an idiot because we have a very large machine that juices oranges for fresh orange juice for our guests, and I should have used it for lemon and lime the whole time. And here's what that machine looks like. And this is my juicing machine. As you can see, I don't have to do anything. It does it itself. It spins, it cuts, it juices, and then I just have to bottle it. Sometimes I like to just stare at it in awe because I am so dumb and spent a year hand juicing lemons and limes when I had this beautiful machine. Back to you, Louie. Now this is where it gets a little tricky to determine whether or not you need this or not. But you make your choice. I'm just gonna show you what it is and you can think about it for yourself. When it comes to juicing things like pineapples or any sort of vegetable or apples, you can't do that with a citrus juicer, and you really can't use this. So that's where something like this juicer will come in handy. It spins and it has it does the spinning thing. You put the stuff in here and the juice comes out at the bottom. Fantastic for juicing things like carrots, ginger, pineapple, apples, cucumbers, I guess, celery, grapes, anything like that that you can't use a citrus juicer for. This will do a fantastic job. Now, I'm not really sure how much this one costs because I actually got this as a gift from my father and he bought it at Salvation Army for $9.99. And you can actually see the price right there. It's still written on it. But it is a fantastic fruit and vegetable juicer. You can find, there's so many different brands of this. I do recommend this if you are gonna be using fresh pineapple juice. Do not buy canned pineapple juice. It does not taste the same. It really doesn't. It's not good. Don't do it. This is also a workhorse, fantastic little machine. I would be nowhere without this. But then again, like I said, think about what that means for you. I don't know how expensive it might be, but hey, check out your local Salvation Army. You might find a good one. But there you have it, guys. I hope that gives you a quick little intro into juicing, why it's important, how to do it. And honestly, the big takeaway that you should take away from this video is that fresh juice is super important. And it's not that difficult to have, especially even with your home bar setup. It's something that it makes a giant world of a difference when it comes to the taste of your cocktails that is indispensable. Any sort of substitute that you could possibly imagine will not yield the same results. Every single cocktail that I will talk about on this channel uses, if it has fresh juice as an ingredient, will always use fresh juice as an ingredient. These cocktails were balanced in a way where the fruit juice that is called for is included in the balance of that cocktail. So there really is no substitute. And like I said to you at the beginning of this video, if you want a simple, quick way to level up your cocktail game up by like 1,000, this is it. But if you enjoyed this video, come on over here, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, share this with a friend, and let me know how I'm doing. Go down in the comments below. Let me know how this video series is going. Is it entertaining? Are you getting stuff out of this? What can I do better? I'm always looking to interact with the folks who watch my channel, and it means the absolute world to me. That's enough from me. I'm gonna get back to drinking something. Oh, I don't have a drink today. I'm gonna make myself a drink, and we'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. Sugar is a key but often misunderstood element to a perfectly balanced cocktail. And today I'm going to explain to you why it is so important. We've all had overly sweet cocktails. We've all had cocktails that were a little too tart, but that is why getting the balance is perfectly right. But let's back up a little bit. If you watch my video on introduction to cocktails, which you can find right here, I talked about the 5 key ingredients to a original cocktail, and sweetener being one of them, and actually being a key component and one that really ties the whole cocktail together. And one of the things that, as a bartender, that kind of really frustrates me in this profession is people's misunderstanding of sugar in a cocktail. Sugar or sweetener in a cocktail serves 2 to 3 key roles within a cocktail. 1, it cuts the burn of the alcohol and makes it more palatable. And 2, it provides a body for a cocktail. For anybody sitting there thinking, oh, but I don't like sweet cocktails, I challenge you and I beg you to please try a daiquiri or a caipirinha without sugar. And you will find that it is an incredibly flat cocktail with not much body. You're gonna have sharpness from the lime and you're gonna have that burning sensation from the rum or the cachaça. And the other part about this that really pisses me off, quite frankly, is that all of these people who order skinny margaritas or skinny cocktails or who ask for a cocktail with no sugar. And a lot of this comes from people thinking, oh, but like sugar's bad for you, all this and that. Well, I have news for you. Alcohol in your body gets broken down into sugar. So I understand being health focused and health conscious, but you should understand that drinking alcohol, you're basically intaking sugar anyway. So having less sugar doesn't actually help you. All it does is make you have a crappy cocktail. Now, again, I understand that there are cocktails that are overly sweet and there are cocktails that are not sweet enough, but that does not mean that a sweetener is not required in a cocktail. So now that we've talked about the importance of a sweetener in a cocktail, let's talk about how it's practically and actually used in a cocktail. So by far the most common version of a sweetener in a cocktail is gonna be simple syrup. It is called simple syrup because it is 1 part water to 1 part sugar. So that table sugar that you'll find in your house, if you were to take a cup of that and a cup of water and mix it together, voila, you have simple syrup. Pretty simple. Simple syrup, simple. Next common sweetener you might find in some cocktails is a demerara sugar syrup. These are usually made from like sugar in the raw, and these have a bit of an earthier quality to it. It isn't so, it's not as refined. It has a lot more of that earthy flavor and gives a really nice body to any cocktail that it's used in. The next two really commonly found syrups that I want to talk to you about are agave syrup and honey syrup. Both of these are derived from natural sweeteners. Agave syrup comes from, I make it from agave nectar, which comes from the agave plant that makes tequila and mezcal. And honey syrup comes from honey. And so what I love about these is that they're not processed. They're not made the way that regular sugar is made. So they end up being at least a little bit more honest, I guess. They're not, you know, a refined sugar that then gets broken down and made into a syrup. You have straight up just regular agave nectar and straight up just regular honey. And for both of these, the proportions are 2 parts of the natural sweetener with 1 part water, just to make it more of a syrup. So these are 2 very, very easy to make and delicious additions to any cocktail that you want to make. And they have fantastic recipes that call for both. They each have different characteristics. They're both a little bit, the agave is a little bit earthier. The honey has that typical honey taste, but it adds a beautiful silky body to a cocktail when used correctly. Both of these are 2 easy, excellent options to add to your repertoire. And you know, for example, honey doesn't go bad. So keep honey on hand, make a syrup when you want, add a little bit of water. You're gonna have a sweetener in most cases. But these 2 are excellent additions to anybody who wants to make cocktails, and I highly recommend you using some. So if you remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about sweeteners serving a 3rd possible purpose in a cocktail. And that purpose is to not only provide body, not only provide a sweet element for a cocktail, but you can do it in a way where it actually imparts its own specific flavor to the cocktail. And that actually is the case for pretty much any of these, because they all have their own inherent flavor. But what I'm alluding to more is making fruit syrups, which is what we do a lot here at La Barretas. So for example, we make passion fruit and pineapple syrup. For both of these, I essentially take the juice of that fruit and add sugar to it to make a syrup. And the reason being is that it actually keeps these fresher longer. It allows me to keep them for about a week, if not 2 weeks. I try not to pass 1 week by keeping them. And that preserves it longer than if I were to just leave the juice fresh. So for example, the pineapple juice, I juice fresh pineapple, I make that juice, I strain it twice to get all the pulp and the different bits out of it. And then I add sugar to it and make a syrup. That way I have pineapple syrup for about 1 to 2 weeks. Same thing with the passion fruit. I get passion fruit puree, add sugar to it. I don't overly sugarify it. It doesn't create this giant sugar bomb, but what it does is it provides body, it provides flavor, it provides sweetness for a cocktail. All around, it helps in 3 different ways, and it's an excellent way to preserve fruit juice. We also make an acai syrup, we make a mango syrup, I also make a cashew syrup from the cashew fruit. And outside of fruit juices, you can even make syrups with different spices as well. So for example, you can make a cinnamon syrup. Great way to introduce cinnamon flavor into a cocktail without having to use, you know, real cinnamon of any kind. It's kind of one of the only ways to add cinnamon as a fresh flavor to the cocktail. And then we also make a ginger syrup. So we juice fresh ginger and add sugar to it. Excellent way to add the ginger flavor to a cocktail. And these are all super valid ways of not only adding some texture, adding a little bit of sweetness, and also adding and infusing a flavor into a cocktail. None of them overpower, none of them are overly sweet, none of them are gonna turn it into a giantly mega sweet cocktail, but you have to learn how to properly balance them. If you were to unload an entire like 3 ounces of one of these into a cocktail, sure, yeah, it's gonna be a little sweet, but that's why you need to properly balance your cocktails. And then you also have sweeteners like orgeat, which is a almond-based sweetener that also has a little bit of specific flavor. It has a little bit of orange blossom water, and I add a little bit of cognac to add a good body to it and a good flavor, and to also preserve it a little bit more. This is a very, very traditional ingredient for certain tiki cocktails and found in a lot of different cocktails, especially it is a key component in a Mai Tai. And so orgeat is one of those as well that adds texture, flavor, a little bit of sweetness, and really completely transforms a cocktail. Without orgeat, a Mai Tai isn't a Mai Tai. And then the last sweetener I want to talk to you about is that sometimes sweeteners don't have to actually just be sugar based. And similar to how the orgeat that I make fresh also has cognac in it, there are certain spirits that can act as a sweetener. For example, Luxardo's maraschino liqueur is a cherry-based liqueur that is actually used as the primary sweetener in a couple of classic cocktails. If you've seen the video that I did on aviation, which you can check out right here, that recipe calls for Luxardo maraschino as essentially the biggest portion of it as the sweetener for that cocktail. It is a spirit, it has alcohol, it substitutes itself into the cocktail in place of a traditional sweetener. So there you have it, guys. I hope this video provides just a little bit of insight into why sweeteners and sugar is really important for a cocktail. I get it, everybody's health conscious, but if you are so health conscious, maybe you shouldn't be drinking. To have a real, well-balanced, properly balanced cocktail, you need a little bit of sugar. I'm not saying add a ton of it, but it's definitely needed. And bitters are an essential part to any perfectly balanced cocktail. But what are they? In this video, I'm gonna tell you all about them. Bitters, like I said, are an essential part to any cocktail. And if you watch the first video in this series on cocktail basics, you'll remember that the 5 key ingredients to the original cocktail was spirit, sweetener, spice, citrus, and a lengthener. And bitters they are that spice element. And if you haven't checked that video out, I do recommend you come on over here and going back, because this video is part of a series on cocktail basics. But before we get into what bitters are, I do want to make a distinction between cocktail bitters and sipping bitters. Cocktail bitters are going to be the ones that we're going to be focusing on this episode, and sipping bitters we are going to leave for another future video. Sipping bitters would be something along the lines of Amaro, or like a chartreuse or something like that, that technically they are a bitter, but they aren't exactly what we're focusing on in this video. And we will save that for another time. So what are bitters? I like to say that bitters are a bartender's spice rack. So a chef has their spice rack that they can call upon to finish out any dish, the same way that a bartender has all the different bitters bottles to be able to call upon to finish out a cocktail, to round it out, to flavor it, to season it in a way. The parallel that I like to bring up is if you've ever had beef without salt, you know that it doesn't really taste great. And as soon as you add salt, it's like the salt brings all of the flavor out of the meat. And that's essentially what a lot of bitters do. Bitters are often the answer to the question of, what is this cocktail missing? It's like, it feels like a cocktail's a little flat, like it's like 80% of the way there, but it just needs like a little bit of something to kind of brighten the flavors up and bring them all together. And bitters can do that. The same way that excellent spices do that for a lot of fantastic dishes in the culinary world. They can elevate, they can balance, and they can even sometimes carry a cocktail depending on how you use it. But there's a big misconception that people think that using bitters is gonna make your cocktail bitter. Well, the truth of the matter is that if used in small amounts, you probably won't even be able to tell what specific bitter was being used unless you train your palate 100%. But a lot of the work goes on in the background of a cocktail, just to kind of bind things together, hold things together, the same way that you just season your food. It shouldn't really be like it shouldn't come as a surprise. The same way that people season their food, you can season your cocktail. And it doesn't always have to be apparent. You add salt to a dish, that doesn't mean it's always salty, And so it's kind of a similar thing with bitters. So at their most basic, bitters are an aromatic flavoring agent made from infusing roots, seeds, bark, spices, fruit peels, herbs, flowers, or any botanicals in a high-proof spirit usually. So where do bitters come from? Well, the origin of bitters is, it actually started off for medicinal purposes. This was back in the day when doctors used to prescribe cocaine, so it wasn't really far-fetched for them to start prescribing alcohol to cure certain things. And it's actually still prevalent today, at least to an extent. In the service industry, we had this thing where if you have a stomach ache or you're not feeling too right, you do a couple splashes of Angostura bitters with either ginger beer or a ginger ale, and it's said to kind of cure it. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's been the case, but that has been prescribed and recommended to me by many, many people in the service industry. But let me know if you ever heard about that, because it's actually, at least in my experience, pretty common. And so it started off as a medicinal thing where doctors were prescribing it, and it was very, very popular. And so then all of a sudden, some people started adding it to cocktails in place of using other spices because it was a liquid spice. And so they really started to use it, and it kind of took a life of its own even after doctors stopped prescribing crazy things. And so what's even more fascinating is that for a really long time after Prohibition in America, it got to a point where there was only really 3 commercially available brands of bitters in the US, and most bars, if they had any bitters at all, it was probably like one dusty bottle of Angostura bitters, because it's specifically called for in a few of the cocktails that survived the disco/club culture era of drinking. Most people, if they think of bitters, they think of just the Angostura bitters with the oversized label, which I ripped off because I can't stand it, and a yellow cap. And this was one of the 3 widely available ones. And if I'm not mistaken, Payshuds was one of the other 3 widely available ones. But what's fascinating about that is that prior to Prohibition, there were hundreds of different kinds of bitters available. This was back in the original cocktail heyday, and it's similar to kind of where we find ourselves today. There was so many widely available kinds of bitters, but then Prohibition came and really ruined a majority of the things happening in the American cocktail and spirit scene. And then the final nail in the coffin ended up being club culture and like just those like club drinks that there was no bitters going into any of that. And so thankfully, we've gotten to a point again where there are hundreds of different kinds of bitters available. And some people would even say that there's too many bitters available, but that is not a sentiment that we prescribe to on this channel or at our bar, because there can never be enough spices in the world and there can never be enough bitters in the world. So how do you actually use and assess these bitters in an actual cocktail if you're trying to come up with your own? Well, the way that I usually do it is I try to come up with the base of a cocktail first, make sure that I have almost like the groundwork all made up, like the different proportions of the juices to the sweetener to the spirit. And once you kind of have a good base, I think it's good to just try a couple of different ones. It's kind of trial and error. It's how it gets really kind of interesting and fun to learn and experience all these different bitters. So the way that I was always taught to kind of assess the flavor of a bitter is to open it up. You're gonna put a dash or 2 on the back of your hand or on your palm. You could do it on your wrist, lots of different ways. You just wanna have it be aerated. So we're gonna do it on the back of my hand. Oops, that's kind of a lot. We're gonna rub it in, and then you can just smell it. And that's a good way for you to get an idea of what that is going to taste like. That was not very smooth, but we're gonna ignore that. But it's still a really good way to be able to taste, and I guess you could taste it, you know, but it's more about the smell, so you can get the idea of what the flavors would be imparted by this specific bitter. And it's also important to know what kind of goes into each one to see what's going to match with the flavors, right? So you then have another classic in Reagan's Orange Bitters, which is really, really crucial because it imparts a good orangey flavor, which is a fantastic way to elevate some flavors in your cocktail. You also have Peychaud bitters, which are another one that's like super old and kind of funky and has a bunch of different mixes of herbs. Very common in Sazeracs or a lot of New Orleans cocktails use Peychauds. And then you got some really fun ones, like you have Aztec chocolate bitters. Some of my current favorites are what Bittermans has been doing. So their Hellfire Habanero Shrub is a bitters that I actually just recently used in a cocktail that's going on our menu at the restaurant in the spring, and I absolutely love it. It gives a nice little heat with a little bit of the vinegary-ness from the shrub. And then you also have Bitterman's Boston Bitters, which I actually just used in a pisco and gin cocktail, which really elevated the floral elements of both the pisco and the gin because they're both very botanical. And then you also have a really awesome one by Bitterman's as well, which is their Tiki Bitters. I'm not gonna even pretend to pronounce the Elamakulele bitters. So I use this in a tiki cocktail that's currently on our menu, and I love it. It has guava, passion fruit, some cinnamon, some allspice. So there's some really awesome tropical flavors found in this by blending some earthier spices with some nice citrusy, fruity elements as well. And then the last bitter, I guess, that I find very fascinating as well is when you actually use like absinthe as a bitter. So for example, like in the Corpse Reviver #2, you do like 2 dashes of absinthe. So the interesting thing about bitters is that while we are talking about cocktail bitters, you can actually use a lot of different almost spicy spirits to be a bitter as well. But these are the most like kind of concentrated, industry standard almost that you may see in a lot of different bars. But the beauty of bitters is that you can actually make them yourself. And Brad Thomas Parsons, who has written a lot of fantastic cocktail books, he has this entire book on bitters, and there are recipes for making your own, cocktails that call for bitters. It dives into the history of bitters way more than I can do in a short video like this. So if you're interested in this, I'm gonna put a link in the description below just for you to take a look at this. It is a fantastic book, and if it interests you that much, you should definitely check it out. It has a lot of really good insights in there. But that's enough for me. I'm gonna get to making myself a cocktail, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers. So you've mixed a bunch of ingredients together and now you have a cocktail. But how do you know it's right? How do you know it's balanced? Well, in this video, I'm gonna show you just that. On the surface, making cocktails is really, really easy. You throw a bunch of stuff together, you shake it or you stir it, you pour it out, and you're good to go, right? Well, not really. Just because you can throw a bunch of stuff together doesn't necessarily make for a good cocktail. And one of the most important skills you can learn as someone who makes cocktails is to really know and learn what a perfectly balanced cocktail is. Now, that gets a little bit more complex because every style of cocktail is a little bit different, but today I'm gonna show you a very, very basic way to kind of train yourself to really start to understand the nuances between a balance. So the key when making cocktails is to get a well-balanced cocktail, is to get all the disparate, different kind of flavors to kind of meet in the middle and make for an incredible experience. You can kind of look at it based on certain templates of cocktails. So for example, what we're gonna be doing here today is we're gonna take a very basic sour, which is 2 parts strong to 1 part sugar and 1 part citrus. This is a category of cocktails that kind of encompasses a lot of different things. Specifically, what we're gonna be making here today is a daiquiri. This would work really well with a whiskey sour, a caipirinha, or anything along those lines where it's 2 parts spirit, 1 part sweet, and 1 part citrus. It would kind of all fit within this one umbrella term of a sour. I chose the daiquiri because it doesn't have any ice once you're done making it, so it kind of will stay at a neutral level and won't finish diluting. That way you'll have time to taste the differences between them. So I'm gonna make 3 variations of a daiquiri, one which I'm gonna consider just right, one that is gonna be more tart, and one that's gonna be more sweet. And the idea behind this exercise is that we are gonna make 3 variations of the same cocktail, and all we're gonna do is alter the amount of each ingredient. That way when you taste them side by side, you'll be able to actually see the difference of what makes a drink too tart or what makes a drink too sweet using the same template. And this is a great exercise to do at home. And so I highly recommend that after you watch this video, you go and you grab a nice bottle of rum. I recommend Diplomatico Planas, or you could do Flor de Caña, extra dry, anything that's a really good white rum. Plantation makes a really great one as well, and fresh lime juice and simple syrup. This is a great exercise to train your palate to know what is perfectly balanced and what is not. But all right, I'm just gonna make these 3 cocktails and we're gonna taste them side by side. All right, so we have here our 3 daiquiris. I made each of these daiquiris with 1.5 ounces of Diplomatico Planas white rum. And then I did this one with, this one's gonna be the too sweet, this one's gonna be the balanced one, and this one's gonna be the too tart with too much lime. So in this one, it was 1.5 ounces of Diplomatico Planas, 3/4 of an ounce of lime juice, and 1¼ ounce of simple syrup. This one was the regular template for a sour, which was 1.5 ounces of the rum, 3/4 of an ounce of lime juice, 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. And this one was the one that had too much lime. So this was 1.5 ounces of rum, 1¼ ounces of lime juice, and 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. And again, this is really a fun exercise. You do get to drink a little bit. So it is a fun way to get to learn what a balanced cocktail is. We're gonna first give a sip to the one that is too sweet. It's not bad. It feels a little off. And this is why the exercise is important, is that if you drank this one on its own, you probably would be like, oh, this is perfect, this is fine. The idea is to really narrow down the nuance of all of this. And so then before we try the one that's just right, we're gonna skip ahead to the one that has too much lime and give this one a taste. And again, it's a little bit more tart. You may think, oh, you know what, that's drinkable, that's okay. But that's the idea, is that you want to give yourself, you want to do both ends of the spectrum and then find yourself in the middle. And then that way you'll go, aha, I see. That's the one where it's a little bit more balanced. All right, so now that we tasted those 2, let's taste the one that's just right. And now this right here, it's the sugar level and the lime level are just right. It doesn't overpower the rum still shines, the lime is there, the sugar is there, and at no point do you feel like there's an imbalance here. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that none of these ingredients are gonna overtake the other and really take command of the cocktail. And this is what I mean by a well-balanced cocktail. This is a really great exercise. And like I said, you can do this with other styles of cocktails. So for example, if you want to take a Manhattan and make 3 versions of it, using different variations of the amounts of each ingredient, you'll be able to figure out what it is that how a Manhattan should taste and how it should be balanced between the vermouth, the whiskey that you choose, and the bitters that you choose. And not to mention how long you stir for. I choose daiquiris because there's less variables. You know, all you're doing is shaking, but it is a great one to do as well so that you can learn how it is to perfectly balance a Manhattan as well. And again, as long as you pick a very simple cocktail, you can kind of do this with anything. And I highly recommend you doing this as a way to train your palate to figure out how to perfectly balance a cocktail. I've got 3 daiquiris to drink, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. Creating original cocktails can be very overwhelming. After all, how do you know if they're gonna taste right or not? Well, in this video, I'm gonna be showing you 3 methods that I've used to create my own cocktails for my bar and restaurant. So the first method that I'm gonna be showing you today is the Mr. Potato Head method. So I actually got the term from one of my favorite cocktail books, the Death & Company cocktail book. The term was coined by Phil Ward, who's one of the head bartenders over at Death & Company. And the idea is pretty simple. You basically take an existing template for a cocktail that you know already exists, and you swap out one ingredient for a different ingredient. The same way that you might pull out Mr. Potato Head's eye and put in his foot. I don't know what you do with your Mr. Potato Head, it's just an idea. But the idea is basically that you would take a cocktail that you love and already enjoy, and you would take out one ingredient and sub in another one, and that can create some really fantastic flavor combinations. And one of the ways that I did that at my bar and restaurant is I took a very classic Saturn, which is 1.5 ounces of London Dry Style gin, 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice, a 1/2 ounce of passion fruit, 1/4 of an ounce of falernum, and 1/4 of an ounce of orgeat. I took the classic template for a Saturn, and I created a cocktail that I called the Lost Planet. Essentially what I did was I swapped out the passion fruit for cashew juice, and that created a whole new cocktail by just subbing in one different juice. This is much more tart, whereas my Lost Planet is a little bit more nutty. It's incredibly delicious, and it was a really easy way to take a classic cocktail and spin it on its head to create something new and unique for my cocktail menu at my bar. And that's kind of the gist of the Mr. Potato Head method. And the idea was that you kind of keep the template and the proportions the same. In this instance, it worked, and you can always tweak your different recipes until you get that proper balance. For me, just swapping out the passion fruit for the cashew worked perfectly. Right, let's move on to the next method. The next method of creating original cocktails that I've used, something that I'm gonna call dressing up a classic cocktail. Essentially, we're not going to swap out any ingredients, but we're just gonna accentuate a cocktail that was more basic in its template with a small addition here and there. What I did for this cocktail, I took a classic caipirinha, which is similar to a daiquiri. For this one, it was 2 ounces of cachaça, 1 ounce lime, 1 ounce simple syrup. And I dressed it up by infusing the cachaça with strawberries. So essentially, I took what was already a very tropical and refreshing cocktail and created a strawberry caipirinha by just simply infusing the cachaça with strawberries. It was a super easy way to dress up a classic original cocktail that really threw a whole new spin on this classic cocktail. And you can try doing this with a lot of different things. I've infused cachaça with apples and cinnamon for a fall caipirinha that I did back in last year. And you know, some people like to infuse their vermouth. I have an infused habanero agave that I use in a cocktail that it's my version of a spicy margarita. So you don't always have to try and reinvent the wheel in creating new cocktails. You can dress them up with slight tweaks here and there, and you get a really awesome effect to it. And for the last method that I'm gonna be showing you today is something that I'm gonna call educated winging it. sometimes you want to kind of create something 100% original without really following a template. And that's cool, that's fine. So one of the ways that I do that is there's this incredible book called The Flavor Bible. This is essentially a giant encyclopedia of what flavors work well together. And it's a great way to start. And so let's say you wanted to create a cocktail and you had one specific ingredient in mind that you're like, I need to make a cocktail with this ingredient. You could open up the Flavor Bible, you could go to the page of that ingredient. Let's say we were gonna use Meyer lemons. All of a sudden we wanna try to figure out different flavor buddies or flavors that we know already work well together, so we don't have to sit here and try a million different combinations before we get to something that we like. So we're gonna go to the page where it says Meyer's lemons, and then we're gonna see what pairs well with it. So you have cream, grapefruit, honey, lemon, lime, orange, sugar, vanilla. And so all of a sudden you can try to build a cocktail using those flavors and maybe some existing knowledge from before. You know, as if you've made cocktails long enough, maybe you've been behind a bar long enough in your life and you've made enough old fashions and different cocktails to kind of have a good general idea of how cocktail ingredients work well together. Having something like the Flavor Bible is an incredible resource to building any original cocktail, especially ones that use a lot of out there fruits and flavors. For me, I use a lot of tropical flavors like passion fruit and guava and things like that are found very naturally in South and Latin America, which isn't always super common here in the States. So I could open up to the passion fruit page, which may take me a second. Here we go. And so I'll go down and I'll see that passion fruit works well with almonds, bananas, caramel, cashews, champagne, chicken, not that I'm gonna use that in a cocktail, chocolate, cilantro, coconut, and coconut milk, which is actually what I did to create a cocktail called the Amazon Headhunter. It's coconut milk, passion fruit, mango, honey, cinnamon, lime, and 2 different kinds of cachaça. It's a really awesome resource when trying to build a cocktail from scratch. Now, it would be foolish of me to not mention the Death & Company cocktail book. This book, if you're trying to create your own cocktails, is where I actually got a lot of the information I shared with you in this video. There's a lot more packed into this book, not to mention a lot of cocktails that I've riffed on and I've tried to make variations on from this book, as have a lot of people. And my last suggestion is have a good collection of cocktail books and recipes so that you can apply all of these things that I showed you today to those recipes to create unique things. You don't always have to riff on a 100% original recipe. Maybe there's a cocktail book like, say, The Spirits of Latin America by Ivy Mix, which there are a couple of classic cocktails, but there's a lot of her original cocktails in here. And something that I've done a lot is I've tried to make a lot of variations on cocktails that she's put in here for myself, such as the Amazon Headhunter that I just told you about. And so it's always good to have a good collection of cocktail books to be able to lean on and riff off of and learn more and more about. And so down in the description below, I'm gonna leave a couple of my favorite cocktail books for you to take a look at, including the 3 that I've showed you here, as well as some other ones. All right, that's enough for me. I've got a couple of amazing cocktails to get back to, and we'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. Eggs or egg whites are a very interesting ingredient in cocktails. And you may be thinking that they're a little bit out of place in a cocktail, but there are many, many classic and modern cocktail recipes that use the whole egg or just the egg whites. And in this video, we're gonna be talking about why we use egg whites or eggs in cocktails, how to safely do it, and then I'm gonna be showing you 2 different cocktail recipes that incorporate egg whites so that you can try this at home. So first start is I should say that using the egg yolk or the whole egg versus just the egg whites, there is a variation and they do work differently in cocktails. So for the sake of this video, we're gonna be focusing solely on using egg whites in a cocktail and not the whole egg. If that is something that interests you, let me know in the comments below because I can explore that in a future video. But for this one, again, we're gonna be focusing solely on the egg white. And so what do the egg whites do in a cocktail? Well, if done correctly, it will create a light, fluffy, velvety, silky, smooth texture to the cocktail that you put it into. And so you must be thinking, well, that doesn't really sound very safe to be just adding raw eggs to a cocktail. Well, that's why the technique and the method that you do it really makes a big difference. But I'll touch upon that technique when we start making the cocktails in a little bit. Throughout history, so many different bartenders have utilized eggs, egg whites, whole eggs in classic cocktails. Cocktails such as the Pisco Sour and the Whiskey Sour, which I'm gonna be showing you today, are just 2 of the different recipes that call for egg whites in them. But there are so many out there that utilize egg whites. And so what I'm gonna teach you right now is how to properly do it so that you are not getting anyone sick or doing it incorrectly so that you're like, oh my God, this tastes disgusting. So let's jump into making the first cocktail, and we're gonna make a pisco sour, and I'll explain as we go along. So the pisco sour is by far one of the most iconic South American cocktails and the definitive pisco cocktail out there. And we're gonna be making one of those because egg whites are a key ingredient in getting a pisco sour right. And we're gonna be using the pisco sour recipe from Spirits of Latin America, which I'll link in the description below if you're interested. So the first thing that we're gonna do is 2 ounces of our Achilado Pisco. I'm using Caravedo Achilado Pisco. 2 ounces of that. We are going to do a 1/2 ounce of freshly squeezed lime juice. Citrus is very important when working with egg whites because it helps to really froth up the egg, and in a way, I don't want to say that it cooks it, but it kind of cooks the egg with the citrus and the alcohol. It makes it a little bit safer to drink. We are also going to do a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice. We are going to do 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. And last but not least, the most important part, we are going to be doing 1 egg white. If you're starting out, I recommend that you break your egg and put the egg white into a separate tin in case you get some of the shell in there, and then you can try again. So we're gonna try and get this on the first shot. I grabbed our big tin. All of our ingredients are still in this one here. So let's crack this over the side here. And then what I do is I like to crack it on the side, crack open the egg, and then I'm gonna roll the yolk back and forth until just the egg white comes out. That was pretty quick, and I was able to get that as I was speaking. But as you can see, the egg yolk is still there, and we only got the egg white in the tin. Now, this next part is the absolute most crucial part of working with egg whites in any cocktail. You're essentially going to do 2 different sets of shaking. First step, we are going to do what's known as a dry shake, meaning there will be no ice in the tin. And the reason we do this is that we're going to really froth up that egg before we introduce the ice and do it again. And we will be shaking for way longer than you would a normal cocktail because we really want to make sure that we are making this egg white as safe to drink as humanly possible. So I'm going to combine both of my tins here. I'm going to just dump the ingredients in here, and then I'm gonna lock up our tin, and we're gonna shake this for about 30 seconds to a minute. I'm gonna speed it up so that you don't have to just watch it. Don't worry, it is perfectly normal to work up a sweat, or at least that's what I tell myself. And so after we've done our dry shake, we're going to crack open our tin, and we're going to introduce ice and then do it again. So another reason why we do 2 steps is that all this does is to froth up the egg and start to create that kind of meringue kind of texture, but we still have to add ice because, as we know, no cocktail is complete until we introduce water and chill it down. All right, so now we're going to add ice to our big tin, about 1 scoop, and then we're going to lock this up again, and now we're going to do our wet shake, again for 30 seconds to about a minute. Whew, all right, I'm telling you, working with egg whites is no joke. But all right, we got a nice frosty tin here. We are going to grab our coupe glass, put it right there. We're gonna pop open our tin. And this next step is also very, very important. We need to double strain this using both a Hawthorne and a fine mesh strainer, just to make sure that none of this egg white is kind of clumping up or anything like that, and to really kind of sift through it to make sure we're getting just what we want into the glass. And so you're gonna see that it's much fluffier and more velvety than other kind of cocktails. And then we're gonna let it settle for a little bit as well. It does tend to froth up a lot, so you end up with a lot more volume in your tin than you're normally accustomed to with regular cocktails. So we're gonna let this sit for just a little bit, and we're gonna see most of the foam settle at the top. But this is how you know that you did it correctly. You have a nice fluffy layer over the top. It's very, very sticky in a way. It's almost like a marshmallow in a way. It's kind of bouncy. I don't suggest you poke the top of your sour cocktails when making it for friends, but when it comes out this way, you know you've done it correctly. If you don't shake enough, you will not get that volume with the egg white, and then you're gonna have a very flat cocktail that kind of tastes like eggs, and that's not what anybody wants. And then no pisco sour is complete without a couple of drops of Angostura over the top, which really highlights one of the really awesome fun parts about working with egg whites, is that you can then get very creative with design. So for example, because it's so light and fluffy, you can drop Angostura bitters over the top and they'll stay at the top, and then you can draw a design. So For example, I'm gonna do a couple of drops and we're gonna basically make a leaf shape with a pick. And then we're gonna grab our pick here and we are going to do a little pattern. And there you have a classic pisco sour. And if you can see, there's that egg white more on the top. It's nice, velvety, smooth. And then on the bottom, you have the rest of the cocktail. But it still is all incorporated. But that's just one of the fun uses for egg whites in a cocktail. But let's move on to the next one because this is another classic that I think you guys would want to know about. All right, so the next cocktail we're gonna make is a classic whiskey sour. So same principles apply. I'm gonna make this one a little bit quicker. So we're gonna do 2 ounces of, I'm using rye whiskey because I like a little bit more spice in my whiskey sours. We're gonna do 2 ounces of rye whiskey. We are going to do 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice. We're gonna do 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. And then we're gonna do our egg white. And then just to be safe again, we're gonna do in our big tin. You can add a drop or 2 of Angostura bitters if you'd like to really kind of spice it up, which we will. So we'll just do one drop of Angostura bitters. And then we're gonna crack our egg again on the side of our tin, and we're only gonna get the egg white in there. And there's that, ooh, a little bit more. And now for our dry shake and then our wet shake. And then add ice and repeat. All right, let's pop that open. All right. Nice, fluffy, looks like a good egg white cocktail. And grab our low ball, a large cube, and again, we're gonna double strain this out over our large cube. Again, lots and lots of volume. The classic garnish of a whiskey sour is a skewered Luxardo cherry. And we'll put that right there. And again, nice head over the top, nice and marshmallowy almost. And then we're gonna give that a sip. Velvety smooth, delicious. The lemon, sugar, and whiskey combine beautifully with that egg to really transform what is already kind of a classic cocktail into something just a little bit more. It is an exquisite use of egg whites, and it's just absolutely delicious. But there you have it, my friends. I hope you're able to learn how to safely use egg whites and why you should use egg whites in cocktails. Maybe not all the time, but sometimes, because it adds a really nice variety and fun layer to cocktails. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world to me if you consider subscribing. I post videos every single week. And if you'd like to find out a couple more egg white cocktails, I'm gonna leave 2 right over here for you to check out, all right? We'll catch you guys in the next one. I got 2 cocktails to drink. Cheers. So you want to become a drink expert, or at the very least, you want to be able to make cocktails to entertain your friends and guests at home. Well, in this video, I'm going to be showing you 3 incredible books to get you on your way to becoming a drink making machine. Oh, and stick around to the end because I have a 4th bonus book recommendation that'll give you the perfect template to create your own cocktails. Throughout my career behind a bar, there have been so many different places that I've learned so much from. Of course, you learn a lot from experience, but there is a lot of knowledge that you just can't get unless you sit down and look for it. And so these 3 books that I'm gonna be giving you recommendations have been 3 books that have been absolutely indispensable to me in my career and have really gotten me to where I am today. But before we get into all of that, if you're enjoying this video at any moment, come on over here and hit that like button. It's a super easy way to show YouTube that you liked my video, and maybe that means they'll show me to more people, and I would greatly appreciate that. But all right, let's get to what you came here for. So the first book I would recommend is Imbibe by David Wondrich. David Wondrich is a cocktail historian, and this book, Imbibe, gives you a very incredible overview of the history of mixology or cocktail making, or however you want to call it, from the very beginning. And in my opinion, you can't learn something unless you learn where it came from and why it even came about. It's really great to be able to throw ingredients together and make drinks, but if you don't understand where all of this came from, the science behind it, why it was ever even important, I don't think you can truly be a bartender. And this book does an amazing job of detailing the incredible history of making cocktails and mixology. One of my favorite parts about this book, when it talks about how revered bartenders were prior to Prohibition. It was seen as a prestigious career, especially because they were there providing for the people, making people happy by making drinks and serving the people. And that's something that really resonated with me when I read this book. And it really pushed me towards making this a career for myself. But indispensable book. Anybody who likes reading about cocktails really needs to have this on their shelf. There's just no other way around it. Now, the most important book that I have ever read, and it was the one that really opened my eyes to this whole cocktail making thing, is the Death & Company cocktail book. Death & Company is an incredible bar in New York City. There we go, it'll stay there. It is an incredible bar in New York City. It is an indispensable book for anybody trying to learn how to make cocktails. So why is that? In this book, they teach you techniques. They teach you how to build cocktails. They teach you everything that you would need to know to actually make a cocktail. Not to mention they give you a whole bunch of classic cocktails and original cocktails that come from Death & Co., along with different stories from the bar and restaurant as well. But the part that really matters to me, or mattered to me at the beginning, was the how to use all the different bar tools, the techniques, how they build a cocktail, how to evaluate a cocktail, how to balance a cocktail. All of the fundamental aspects of being a bartender are jam-packed in this book, and you get so much bonus material out of it. If you're someone who's never even picked up a cocktail shaker or a cocktail mixing glass, and you're just like, I really want to learn all about that, this book is definitely the one that you do need to have out of all of the three if you could only have one. Of course, I recommend all three of them, but this one is one that I legitimately cannot recommend enough. My copy is so beat up because of how many times I've used this. It's incredible. I've only had this book for about 3 to 4 years, and it's really beat up already, but definitely one that you do need for your collection. And the last cocktail book that I'm going to recommend today is Jim Meehan's Bartender's Manual. Like the Death & Company cocktail book, this book really kind of encapsulates and covers a little bit of everything as it comes to the bartending and cocktail making world. Where this goes a step further than the Death & Company cocktail book is that it actually has detailed chapters on all of the different spirits that really explain where each different spirit comes from, so you can really have a good grasp on where all of this stuff really comes from and what they are and what makes spirits different from one another, like what makes rum different from whiskey or gin was different from tequila, and each one is detailed and beautiful. He has an entire section of classic cocktails in here that you definitely need to know, as well as different stories from different bars and different layouts to how different bars are laid out, which for me was indispensable as a bar owner. I'm sure that's not going to apply to everyone, but it is really incredible to see how bars are laid out, at least in my opinion. And there's just so many different tips and tricks that you can gain from reading this book. But there you have it, my friends. 3 amazing, essential cocktail books that I believe you need to get on your way to becoming an expert drink maker. If you enjoyed this video, it'd mean the world to me if you come on over here and hit that subscribe button. I post videos every single week on cocktails, my favorite spirits, tips and tricks on how to bartend, and what it's like to own my own restaurant and bar. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. Oh, but don't go anywhere, because I still have that bonus book recommendation for you. And the 4th book, and while I don't consider it to be essential to making drinks based off of other recipes, the Cocktail Codex by the same people who wrote the Death & Company cocktail book is indispensable if you're trying to learn to create your own cocktail. This book basically has a theory, and it breaks it down that every cocktail can be traced back to 6 root cocktails. And basically every cocktail variation that anybody's ever come up with essentially comes back to these 6 root cocktails. And it's a fascinating theory that really opens your eyes into how to be able to create your own cocktail based off of one of these classic, thought out, and winning templates that you can then go and elaborate on with your own variation and riff. And so if you're an aspiring bartender who wants to learn to make their own cocktails, you really need to have the Cocktail Codex. It's just such an incredible book. And on top of those 6 root cocktails, it's jam-packed with a ton more original cocktails by them and by other bartenders that you can then use as reference or learn to riff on. So I cannot recommend this one enough as a bonus to anybody who wants to become a bartender or drink maker. But that's enough from me. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.